I'd like to welcome you to what we hope is going to be the first of a number of different type of podcast type of things. My name is Gareth Blakesley, Operations Manager at Lake Catherine, and joining me is...
I'm Jesse Blazek. I'm the Director of the Palos Heights Public Library.
And we're joining you today because we actually want to talk a little bit about some of the things we have going on. We have a joint venture coming up, a Nature and Literature Festival, and Jesse's been kind enough to help with this. So why was this important for you to help us?
Well, obviously, part of the library's mission is to connect with the public in whatever ways we can to promote literacy, to enrich the lives of the community. And, Lake Catherine is one of the most popular places in town. People come from miles around, to experience that. And, we saw a great opportunity to partner up with Lake Catherine to promote its mission, but also, to work together to promote the mission of the library and this idea of nature and literature and the confluence of the two just makes sense in terms of a way that we can sort of piggyback off each other's memberships. And hopefully there are people who are regular visitors of the library who will find this to be an interesting event and maybe go to Lake Catherine for the first time or get more involved at Lake Catherine, and vice versa. People who regularly go to Lake Catherine and have their interest piqued in terms of nature writing and are able to explore more of what the library has to offer, especially in terms of illuminating the world of nature.
I've always been I was just excited that you guys were actually willing to do something like this, and the fact that I've always been fascinated by books and literature, and I always felt for me personally that nature and books were always a way for me to connect with nature and also learn about nature. And so for me it was one of these things that let's try and do this, and the fact that you guys were willing or daft enough to go along with it is a great idea. So
yeah, obviously people read for a lot of different reasons, but I think one of the primary reasons people read is people put it in terms of escaping from reality a lot of times, but I think that's sort of a misstatement of the fact that people are reading to connect with the world in a different way. And reading is about telling stories, and these stories are about how we live our lives. And I think that's ultimately what books are all about at root. And so, when you think about how people relate to what they're reading, and how that can relate to what they're actually doing in their lives on a daily basis. Well, if people are going to Lake Catherine, or people are interested in Lake Catherine and what they see around them, and people are interested in reading, if they're interested in both of those things, then it just makes sense that people would be interested in reading about nature, and whether they have or not, and whether they're aware of what's out there in terms of nature writing, or in terms of literature that's really centered around nature. People might not be aware of those things, and this is a great opportunity from the library's perspective to again, like I said, promote that sort of literary awareness, and I think maybe grab people in a way that they haven't been grabbed before.
I think this Dennis Downs chap is going to be quite an interesting character as well. I haven't read his book yet, but it looks fascinating.
Right. And just the idea of, obviously nature has played so many different roles throughout history in terms of the way it's shaped society, the way society has shaped itself around nature, but this idea of sort of shaping trees as waymarkers over the course of decades, from young saplings to fully mature trees is really a cool concept, I think.
It also changes our perspective on the world. I think a lot of the times we think about the now or the next year rather than the long term. And yes, we may plant a tree, but the fact that you actually have to modify the tree as it goes along, I think that's a fascinating thing, and especially someone from me who's a natural resources guy.
Exactly.
It's great. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things I think about a lot of what resonates with me in terms of nature in the books that I read. That, like you said, I think we're used to thinking of things in terms of the now, in terms of our very immediate surroundings, and maybe we're not used to thinking about the fact that we do live in a natural environment. Maybe it's a very sort of urbanized environment, or it's full of roads and buildings and whatnot. It's still nature. But we're used to living in a very sort of man-made or manipulated segment of nature, where I think one of the things that's so interesting to me in the books that I read that tie to nature are like you said, the sort of the long game, the way that even though we might manipulate our natural environment in extremely significant ways, it's immutable. I mean, it's still there. We can't escape it, and you know, there are various ways in which we're living in this symbiotic relationship, and we historically have lived in these various relationships with nature.
Well, I think books also remind us of the fact that when you read about these stories and how we've connected over the years, whether it's for agriculture, forestry, or just being inspired by nature, it reminds us that we are actually part of nature.
Right.
And I think a lot of the times we kind of lose sight of that. So I definitely think that having that connectivity with nature is vitally important, and that literature can definitely help us with that. And I think we're doing some creative writing at that as well, which I think would be great.
Right, exactly. I think, obviously reading about nature is one thing, and like you said, the role that has to play in enriching our perception of the natural world that we live in. But I think writing is an underestimated endeavor. It's extremely worthwhile, but I think so few people really give it a try. Mm-hmm. And I think nature writing is a great foot in the door for anybody who maybe has never written before or has done some writing but would like to try something new. But I think it's a very accessible way of getting into writing and exploring it, and mm-hmm. anybody can be a writer. And I think if you look around at some surprisingly famous writers these days who never thought that they might end up doing that. I think you just get started by giving it a try, mm-hmm. and so I think this is going to be a great opportunity for people to give it a shot.
Well, I think when I was growing up, I always thought that writing, heck, it's something you have to do in English classes.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
Whereas now, I'm like, I quite enjoy jotting down a few ideas, and it's the creative process is definitely an art form, and that is something that I think, unfortunately, you kind of lose sight of when you're younger, and as you get older, you go, and now I understand a little bit more of this. And
right. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are very avid readers, who might not do any writing, whether they're aware of it or not, have a good grasp of what good writing really is, mm-hmm. or what interesting, compelling writing really is. But maybe have never, in their adult lives at least, given it a shot.
Yeah. So I just actually finished a book that I got when I was back in England called The Swordfish and the Star, and it's about fishermen on the shoreline there. And even though it's not really a nature book per se, it definitely talks about that interaction with the fishermen had with their environment and how well they know it. And it kind of led me to thinking about their connection with the environment, and they know so much about where the shoals are, where the fish are. And they talked about in here a lot about how the big trawlers would come in and take away a lot of the fishing stock in different areas, and so it's not necessarily a nature book per se, but Cornish pilchards and sardines is a big thing of it, and it led me to look up on different websites what fish you should be eating because of like how available they are. And so, not necessarily a nature book per se, but it's something I certainly enjoyed, and I learned a lot about my homeland, mm-hmm. so to speak. Have you got a book you've just been reading like that?
Yeah, a number of books come to mind, and my interest is a little more sort of fringe nature writing along these lines too. One of my favorite books of all time is A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson.
Yeah, that's great.
It's part biography, part humor writing, but he does go into great detail in terms of the Appalachian Trail and what it's like to hike it, especially as an old out of shape guy with your crazy buddy along for the ride, mm-hmm. All on a whim. So it's a really entertaining read, but I think it's also really grabs me in terms of the way he's describing
he's funny though as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like you said, I think writing is about storytelling, mm-hmm. and the best writers, regardless of how dry the material might seem, are able to do it in a way that's captivating to you. And another book that comes to my mind that I've read recently is called Cod, a biography, mm-hmm. By Mark Kurlansky.
Sounds boring initially.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a super gripping read, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a biography of cod, mm-hmm. As it relates to human history anyway, and talks about sort of the relationship between cod and human society going back, thousands of years, obviously. In Roman times, salt cod was big food commodity, and obviously cod today continues to be one of the major fish that we consume. And so, it kind of follows this history of our relationship with cod as a society, or as humanity, and brings it to modern day Canada and the Canadian fishing industry, and it really he has this way of really writing this engaging historical narrative about this thing that, to look at the title or maybe even read the tagline, sounds like nobody would ever be interested in reading this book, but 1 million plus copies later, this is an extremely well-known book.
Well, I read his other book, Salt, based on the premise that a friend of mine told me that they really enjoyed cod, and I was at an airport and I didn't have anything to read. I was like, no, I'll pick up Salt, see how that is.
Right.
And I was like, this is fascinating.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't think it, but the way you tell such a story about how important the salt is and cod is to cultures around the world, and salt's the only mineral we actually actively consume.
Right.
The only rock we try to consume.
Right.
And obviously through like preservation of foods and fish and
the huge role that the huge impact that it's had on our ability to, like you said, preserve food and live as sort of larger societies. That's can't be overstated. And I think, again, it's the same author, and I think the same sort of gimmick in terms of the title, Salt.
Yeah.
But fascinating read, and again, in terms of telling a story about how people relate to nature through literature is just fascinating.
There's a number of books I've been trying to read, and one of them was The Old Ways by a guy called Robert McFarlane, and that's very much of a specific book about how to interact with the environment. And he's written a number of books called In Search of the Wild. No, that's wrong, actually. I got the title wrong there. But he's done a number of other books as well, and they're very, very good, and they're very good about connecting history, space, and nature to your environment and walking through those landscapes. And some of them are some of the best books I've read. Mm-hmm. And you would think that they wouldn't be that interesting off the bat of it, but they tell a story.
Right.
And The Old Ways, he goes to different parts of the world and actually does an old route. And the idea is that those landscapes imprint on the people as much as the people imprint on the landscape. Mm-hmm. And he has similar themes for a lot of his other books, but I've really always enjoyed his books, and that was very much a strict nature and connectivity book, and there's a few more of those coming out, which I think we've got H is for Hawk coming up on
right.
our Nature by the Book.
I was just going to say, it's really reminding me a lot of the other sort of partnership we have going on, which is the Nature by the Book series. We've done 2 so far, and they've been really incredibly interesting events. This is a series that we're hosting at the library with a panel discussion of people from various backgrounds. Obviously, you're part of the panel. We have a couple of people with a more literary background, people with a more scientific background, and each month we've chosen a book to discuss on the theme. And can you talk a little bit about the first 2 books that we did?
Oh yeah, we did The Hidden Life of Trees, the last one, which was a fascinating read, and it was an interesting panel discussion because some people enjoyed how it was written, some people didn't. Yeah. But everyone agreed that it was a really important book, the way the insights that it gave, and I thought it was fascinating. Even as someone who actually deals with trees on a daily basis, I learned a few things, and as much from sometimes you may know all these bits of information, but they collated it all very well into one piece, and it makes you think about it all together collectively. And so I think it's Peter Waldburn. He's a German author and forester, and he started writing about how he now manages his woodlands and how trees interact, and he used pretty up-to-date scientific knowledge to back his chapters up and his information up, and I thought it was really, really good. And the first book we read was On Trails, I believe by Robert Moore, and he basically went around the US and in other locations based off his experience on the Appalachian Trail, and like try to do different trails throughout different areas. And in a similar vein, how landscape is important to people, and how say different Native Americans, they don't know how to necessarily to look on a map how to get from one place to another,
right?
But they actually have memories of how to get from one place, and the stories that they create is a way of getting from one location to the next. And I felt that was pretty fascinating as well. And he spoke to a number of other different people, so both very different books and very interesting. H is for Hawk, that is coming up.
That's on March 29th?
Yeah. I've read that, and actually really enjoyed it. And dare I say, it wasn't normally a book that I thought I would actually get into. Talks about emotions and stuff, and I'm not sure I'm usually good about that. But it was fascinating, and the lady who wrote the book was dealing with the death of her father, and at the same time was training a goshawk. Very similar to the Cooper's hawk that you might find around here, and falconry, and all the trials and tribulations that she had with one dealing with grief, but also dealing with trying to train this hawk, and the hawk picks up on sometimes her emotions, and it's pretty interesting. I read it a long time ago, well, not that long ago, but maybe a year or so, so I actually probably have to reread it, but I think it'll be an interesting discussion when we come to talk about it.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the extremely popular book Wild,
yes,
which again is the story of this person who's who immerses herself in nature, mm-hmm. sort of as a way of sort of making sense of life all over again.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's one of those stories that has resonated so strongly with people. Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of different reasons, but I think this Helen McDonald book is in a similar vein. There's a lot of different angles that I think will appeal to people. Mm-hmm. So I hope people join us on the 29th at the library to join in the discussion on that book. Yeah. And then the book after that, I believe in June, mm-hmm. is by one of my favorite authors, Barbara Kingsolver. Mm-hmm. We're discussing High Tide in Tucson, which is a series of essays that she wrote, and a number of the essays are quintessential examples of the type of nature writing that mm-hmm. anybody can do. Yeah. And I mean, she's an author. She's written some very popular fiction titles, but in terms of the essays in this book, it's a matter of her looking around at her environment and how the world is kind of working around her, mm-hmm. How nature is working around her. And I think it's just very accessible in terms of nature writing. So I'm excited about that one as well.
That one I haven't read yet. I haven't read anything by her yet, so it'd be interesting to get into that. And
she's another one, like I said, she's one of my favorite writers in terms of her fiction, and her fiction resonates with me on a natural level too. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the way she talks about, the relationships between humans, human societies, and nature.
Yeah, I think it's going to be definitely a fascinating kind of insight, and I always like it when other people bring other books to the table as well, because I have my own biases, obviously.
Right.
And then when someone says, "No, you should read this," and I go, "Okay," and I probably wouldn't necessarily pick it up necessarily myself, and think, "Well, that was great. Right. I'm really glad I did that." And someone recommended that.
Yeah, and on the one hand, I think that's why that's one of the things that's so interesting and so compelling about the Nature and Literature Festival itself. Mm-hmm. As this opportunity to try and bring these two worlds together mm-hmm. in a way that's very concrete, very real for people. Which is April 29th, I think we're doing that.
Right,
April 29th at Lake Catherine. It'll be kind of a day-long event and lots of different elements going on there.
Yeah,
like you said, including a really interesting keynote speaker and various workshops and hayride and things like that going on.
I'm excited by it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also with our continued series where we continue to talk about these books, and that's one of the things that, again, I think is so interesting. We're bringing in people from all kinds of different backgrounds who maybe are fans of these particular books, maybe
mm-hmm.
have never heard of them before, and we open up a discussion and cross the board from all perspectives.
I think it's great because it meets our mission to connect people with nature. It's very simple, but and this is one avenue, and we're really happy that the library was able to help do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's fantastic.
Exactly, and as I said, I mean, meets our mission too in terms of promoting literacy, and I think this really the specific branch of literature that I think is underestimated and often mm-hmm. overlooked, and is much more accessible, much more real than maybe a lot of people are aware of. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to to explore it, and I'm really looking forward to what we've got going on.
Well, Jesse, really thank you for chatting with me today. And, I think it's really good, and we hope to do more of these in the future. So stay tuned. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Gareth.